here's the quick agenda. Just give a little recap on Dalkia, a little background on utility rebates, how much money is out there. ACEEE put out a really great study in February, and we're going to touch on some of the findings from that, some trends in programs, and then what we're seeing now is just the increase in bonuses that programs are offering throughout the end of the year. We've seen several programs announce those already, and we think that's going to be a big trend throughout the rest of the year. Just to touch on Dalkia, the company formerly known as Renewable Energy, we were acquired by Dalkia, which is a large energy company in France, about 3 years ago, and we rebranded back in the fall. And really our mission in life is trying to decarbonize the economy, mainly focusing on existing buildings. And so we're trying to find good investable projects that can help reduce energy consumption on site or generate power on site. And one of the keys to making those projects work and making them financially attractive are utility rebates. So utility rebates, particularly electric utility rebates, I'm going to focus on that most of the presentation, but there are rebates for gas savings, and then there's also rebates for on-site renewable energy, alternative energy credits, and solar storage, energy storage, and shifting the demand. But again, I'm going to focus mainly on electric incentives. There's over $4 billion put out annually in incentives. So it's a really large market. It's core to our business. And last year, we applied for and received over $5 million in energy rebates. I'm showing here the check ceremony for a project we completed at Great Wolf Lodge in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Great Wolf Lodge, New England, we installed 300 kW of combined heat and power to help heat their water parks and produce power on site. I'll give a quick little background on utility programs. So they really started in California in the 70s, and since then the per capita energy usage in California has remained flat when we've gone through so much technology change and the explosion of the electronics industry. And then you can see that really, I think for the rest of the US, rebates became really popular in the 2000s. I joined this company 12 years ago, right when in 2008, and ComEd in Chicago, where I live, had just come out with their rebate program, and that was the first year. Programs are state regulated, so utilities generally had not been voluntarily giving away money to reduce their load, but state laws started passing requiring these reductions. They're funded by taxes on utility bills, and with that, utilities generally need to demonstrate that they're spending their money well. They don't want to incentivize things that are already happening, and so what we see is, as for example, LED lighting is totally commonplace and in widespread adoption. Incentives are decreasing on those measures, whereas they're increasing on newer technology and things that are new to the market. And so really it's meant to try to get a customer off the fence and to try to shift the behavior. So a lot of times people ask, well, why don't they incentivize this? It saves more money than that. Well, it's really because you probably were going to do that other project already. Really some of the benefits of the utilities and why state lawmakers and lobbyists have been pushing for these rebate programs in general is that it really is lower cost than any of the alternatives. It's the lowest cost source of power. It avoids adding new power plants. It avoids adding new transmission lines, new distribution. Any of the three pictures here on the right, nobody wants in their backyard. And so really taking load off the grid is going to help. And one of the things that we've seen as a more recent driver in the past few years is greenhouse gas emissions, as states, cities, municipalities are all moving to track the carbon footprint of their city and all of its residents and businesses, and trying to come up with strategic plans to help reduce those. There was a really great study that came out in February from the ACEEE, and they put together a scorecard of the 52 largest utilities. It's about 150 pages. I've got the link shown here, and there was also a webinar about it that talks about the rankings, but also talks about some of the public policy that is feeding into what makes a great program. So one, I think you have to have great utility support, but two, you have to have a great regulatory environment, and things are constantly evolving in what those priorities are. And so shown here are really the top programs: Eversource in Massachusetts, National Grid in Massachusetts, San Diego Gas and Electric, my home utility, ComEd, Baltimore Gas and Electric. These are all really the top tier programs in the US. And there's a lot of complexity in how they did this ranking. Dalkia is focused on businesses, and typically large businesses that have a national footprint. So I'm always looking at where's the most money being spent. So I took the research and created this map of which utilities are spending the most. So Massachusetts is spending about 10% of its revenue on energy efficiency. Hawaii wasn't in their study, but I did talk to the utility there and their rebate program, and they're about 8%. So there's great incentives there. Illinois is third on the list. And you can see just kind of the darker blue here is where they have more money as a percent of revenue, and then the lighter blue and the gray, and then the white is where it's lower. This study did not include all utilities. One that jumps out to me on here is Tennessee. Tennessee Valley Authority does have good incentive programs. It just wasn't captured in this study. So. Okay. One of the trends that we see are increasing complexity in programs. Like I said, when I started here 12 years ago, generally the incentives were prescriptive. They were take out T12 fluorescent, put in T8 with a high efficiency ballast, and you get $10. And it was very, the programs were limited. And what we've seen, over the past 10 years, and even over the past 5 years, when the ACEEE first did their study, or did the study 3 years ago, there were 300 different programs offered by these 50 utilities. Now there's over 900. So there's really an increase in the complexity of offerings, a lot more focus on HVAC. And I think one of the challenges is, as you get a more complex program, there's some things that overlap. Is it better to retrofit or to replace? And if there's generally going to be incentives for both. And, we working with clients nationally, in one state, it might be better to the lighting fixture. In another state, it's more cost effective to replace the entire fixture. And so those are some of the challenges where, as you look at these complex programs, is it better to retrofit an RTU? Should you add controls to it? Or should you replace the unit? And those are the things that we focus on each day. Some of the other changes we've seen, many of the programs are moving more items upstream into upstream utility incentives. And really what that means is you can call it upstream or midstream, just depends on what they refer to it as, but the incentive then is done by the distributor. It's typically local distributors that are registered in those programs. So one of the challenges for a national company like ourselves is trying to ensure that those rebates are actually applied, and really that the customer sees and has visibility to the incentive amounts, and that it's still being passed on. And as things move upstream, it also shifts the burden of paperwork to distributors that may not have been doing that paperwork in the past. Some of the other shifts, in focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, more distributed energy rebates, peak demand reduction. I know APS in Phoenix shifted their program dramatically to really focus on anything that can reduce peak demand. And what they saw as a driver is with all this renewable energy coming on board, there's more fluctuations on the grid, and they need to be able to ensure that they can provide stable power. There's some really great monitoring-based performance incentives. We are working on programs in Maryland right now that has some great incentives. I know in NYSERDA they have some real-time energy monitoring. And so those are some of the shifts. And also we see more utilities offering on-bill financing for customers, be it DT in Detroit, PG&E in California. I think the post-COVID on-bill financing is going to be more and more attractive. So one of the other trends I wanted to highlight is the EV charging. As electrical vehicles are growing dramatically, the ACEEE report identified 16 major utilities offering incentives. And this is one where I think as utility electric consumption has been flat or decreasing, the transportation sector is 28% of the emissions. And so moving that from fossil fuels to electric fuel, it's more energy efficient, it has lower emissions, and electric utilities generally see as that may be adding some load growth back to them. Some of the best programs we've seen are in California, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, with Eversource and National Grid both have really great programs right now. And so we anticipate EV charging as a growing field and growing rebates. Generally, I've been talking about energy efficiency incentives, and I did want to touch a little bit on renewables as well. So renewables have really increased their adoption, and their prices have fallen. Their incentives have actually fallen as well. And what I had said earlier in the presentation, the incentive money is generally going to be focused on new items, new initiatives, and as the adoption increases, generally the utility incentive money decreases. That said, because the prices have come down so much, the returns are still really good. And so I just highlighted across the country where some of the best returns are, the areas in red have higher returns, and then the orange, yellow, and then the green have the lower returns. One of the changes, one of the bigger drivers for solar has been the federal tax credit. That has decreased in 2020 and is going to continue to decrease each year, but hopefully the prices keep decreasing as well. So one of the other macro trends that we see and this is really emerging, is the electrification of the economy. The real path to getting to reducing carbon emissions is converting the grid first to renewable power, and then as that happens, converting away from fossil fuels being burnt on site. So the electrification movement is really taking out any gas-fired boilers, hot water heaters, furnaces, moving to heat pumps and new fuel sources, or moving to electric, mainly heat pump technology. And we see, in the new construction in California, there are towns that are banning natural gas in new construction. Long-term, New York has $6.8 billion in long-term funding for electrification. So this is one that's really in its infancy, but really over the next 10 years is going to be a major force. Getting back to today, what we're seeing is, the utilities are driven by these state laws. The state laws have passed and they say you need to have a 3% reduction on your growth. You can fund it by adding this tax to everyone's bills, but you need to come up with that reduction, and you need to track that and prove the results. And so even if utility consumption with everyone staying at home is going down with businesses closed, that's not attributed to the utility incentive money. So utilities are still going to have to meet those goals, whether consumption on the grid has gone down or up, and regardless, they need to track that their program was responsible for those reductions. So with many of our customers have reduced CapEx projects, have canceled projects, we're seeing, there's going to be fewer projects in 2020, which means to try to reach those goals, there's going to be increases in bonuses in the utility incentives. One of the programs that we've worked in is the Nevada Energy Program, and in preparing for this, I went on their website. You can track how many funds are available. Now, their program typically comes out mid-February each year, and right now, their funds are 100% available for the rest of the year, which really means that people have just not been doing projects. I don't think that's a shock to anyone, but what we're starting to see, really on a weekly basis is emails from different utilities talking about bonuses through the rest of the year. So 8 out of the 52 major utility programs have already announced bonuses. They're typically 25 to 50% over their normal incentive levels. And really what we anticipate is that there will be many more of these as the year goes on. We think that, one, it's good to get customers ready for this, and that in the fall, it's going to be extremely busy trying to get projects completed within the utilities' fiscal years. And this is by no means a complete list, and it's changing daily with utilities trying to increase their incentives. Wanted to thank you for attending. Really maximizing utility rebates and reducing the capital costs for projects is our core business. We really feel that this is going to be a key to driving projects in 2020. So we'd love for you to reach out either to your Dalkia salesperson or to Katie, who's listed here. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and hope you have a great day.